time is it? How much time does it take to buy groceries? Time seems so natural. The flow of moments, the knife's edge present, the indeterminable past, the unknowable future. Time, the absolute standard. But what seems so natural and absolute is in reality not so. Einstein shocked the world by showing that time was relative. What does relative mean? What new ideas do scientists have about time? What's real about time? I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth is my journey to find out. To get myself oriented, I begin at the University of California, Irvine, with Gregory Benford, a physicist and a science fiction writer. Time affects Greg in his science and in his fiction. Greg, time is something that everybody understands until you try to describe it.
Time has always puzzled me. One of my first well-received novels was called Timescape, because I tried to write about it as a landscape in which you could move instead of just being marched through it. It's a novel about how physicists are trying to study this problem because they've discovered a way of propagating information backward in time. Not people, just information. And the whole novel is about the struggle and what it implies, because usually science proceeds by you make a discovery, or you invent something, and then you see the implications later. And that's really a very good way to structure a novel. So toward the end of the novel, they discovered that they have successfully conveyed this information backward in time about a disaster in the future. But they're still living in the same world. And what's the answer? How is this possible? How can it be reconciled? And the answer is the information went backward. It caused the universe to split into two threads. And one of them, the world got saved. And you saved it, but you are living in this other universe. So somebody else is much happier elsewhere, and that's your reward, but you're still stuck in this universe.
That's actually very quantum mechanical in its thinking.
I invoked a quantum mechanical mechanism. You can reconcile what appears to be true in the laws of the universe, particularly general relativity, that you can, in principle, propagate information backward in time, and yet we don't ever seem to see it happening. And the answer is quantum mechanics.
Because it splits.
Right. It is the attempt to create, you'd say, a paradox that causes the quantum mechanical splitting that makes two universes.
What do you feel? What do you feel time is in reality?
Well, to me, this is the universe's way of saying, nice try, but no cigar. That the universe is set up in such a way that these things are not only conceivable, but you can actually do it, but you can't change your world. And that is the deep lesson of reality, is that when you get to this level, you have become godlike in that you actually are literally creating other universes, but you don't get to live there.
What do we do with that? Do we assume that the universe therefore has branched many times and there's an infinite number of these branchings?
Well, it's possible. The tough things you don't know. So it means that there are unanswerable questions like this.
We know space-time relate together, but that's such a hard thing to grasp.
Well, you could say, are there universes in which there is no time? And I guess the stand-up answer would be yes, but not much happens. That you can conceive of other universes. So, say a universe in which there are two axes of time. We have three or more axes of space, but what about two axes of time?
Yeah, what would that mean?
Well, what it immediately means is that you can make loops in it. You can move on one axis, move to the other axis, and so on. And you can create paradoxes immediately. It's no problem at all. And how could you possibly think about such a universe? You would abandon causality. There would be laws, but you could always go back and rejigger the results. What kind of universe is that? Well, it's not one I want to live in. Scary. It's a universe with infinite many plot lines.
And what that would mean is that it's very hard, it's impossible to relate events together in relationships.
Yes.
So what that seems to indicate is that time being limited to one dimension gives the universe its intelligibility.
Yes, to us. But remember, we emerged from the universe. We've evolved in a universe that, and the only way we could make it was to have it make sense.
Yes.
Could there be a universe that even had two axes of time, and what kind of creature could evolve there? Well, it wouldn't be like us. And that's a perfectly good example of something that's beyond our conceptual horizons. We literally cannot conceive of this place because it would literally make no sense. Maybe a universe with two time axes in it doesn't exist because even God couldn't figure it out.
So time is not the static backdrop of events, but something active and dynamic. How does time happen? Can time expand and contract? I go to Caltech to ask Kip Thorne, an expert on Einstein's theory of relativity. When time ticks, I'm told, what I see is not always what you see. How can that be? Kip, to talk about space and time to most people is to talk about something that's so absolute, so given that it just seems like part of our world, and yet space and time have a very integral relationship.
Indeed, Galileo, Newton, and all of the great scientists before the 20th century thought of space and time as absolute and having no real intimate connection. But Einstein taught us otherwise. Einstein's great insight of 1905 was to recognize that space and time are personal. Your time flows at one rate, my time flows at a different rate. What you see as space, I may see as a mixture of space and time in a very precise sense. It's a little hard to grasp. Let's begin, say, with time. Einstein's special relativity and general relativity tell us that if you move at a high speed past me, and I watch clocks that you carry tick, those clocks will appear to me to tick more slowly than my clocks. But at the same time, you're going past me, of course you see me moving relative to you. You look at my clocks, you see my clocks tick slower than yours. So I see your clocks tick slow. You see my clocks tick slow. That's crazy. That's crazy. That's crazy. It isn't possible.
It's impossible.
But it is possible. It's possible because what you regard as two simultaneous events occurring at the same time but at different locations in space, I don't see them as simultaneous. If you have two firecrackers and you carry them with you and you move at high speed and you set them off simultaneously, measurements that I make will show the firecracker at the back go off first, the firecracker at the front go off afterwards. So there are weird things in how time seems to behave in simultaneity. Space and time are personal. What you see as space, I see as a mixture of space and time.
Now, the critical factor in making this happen is the standardization of the speed of light from Einstein's special theory of relativity. How does that work?
Einstein postulated, but it's maybe better to say that he intuited, that the speed of light will be the same as measured by everyone, no matter how they move through the universe. Now, in reality, if you go deep into the philosophy of science, what's really going on here is Einstein says, if you define your ways of measuring space and time, define the rate of flow of time in a manner that makes the laws of physics look simple, so that, for example, time is ticked at a regular way by atomic clocks as atoms vibrate in a molecule. It's ticked at a regular way by an atomic clock. And he said, this is the way we should define lengths and time, is so that the laws of physics look simple. Having chosen that, made that choice, then the speed of light is the same as seen by everybody, and then time is personal, space is personal. A very deep insight.
What are the implications of having space and time so integrated and so personal?
Well, when Einstein recognized this weird behavior of space and time, the word he used is they're relative. I prefer personal, but they are relative to you or relative to me. And that's where the name relativity comes from. One of his teachers from school, named Hermann Minkowski, looked at Einstein's laws and said, hey, I can write these laws in a much more beautiful mathematical form if I regard space and time as unified into a single thing called space-time. And this space-time has then 4 dimensions, 1 dimension of time and 3 dimensions of space. And I can formulate this unification in such a way that I can understand the personal nature of space, the personal nature of time, that you, if you move at high speed relative to me, you are in some sense slicing through space-time, taking a 3-dimensional surface in space-time that is different from what I take. But there is a unified space and time, all unified together. And we have the entire future history, the entire past history, all of space going out through the universe, all of space and time. And each point in this 4 dimensions, 1 time dimension and 3 space dimensions, each point is an event. If I think of time as going upward, the birth of Abraham Lincoln occurred here. His death occurred there. His assassination occurred there. During his life, he went through space-time, through this block universe where each point represents an event. He went through space-time, through the beginning of the Civil War, on up to his ultimate death, moving through space-time. And we described that his life by a curve in this 4-dimensional space-time in this block universe, with space and time unified then in this geometric 4-dimensional way. But there really is a difference between space directions and time directions. Space directions and time directions are distinguished in that you can always go out in space and come back. You can always go forward in time, but you can't come back. Time has this inexorable flow in the forward direction. So it's a very rich block universe with these different kinds of behaviors.
What do you do with the future?
What do I do with the future? I enjoy it as it comes.
But in the block universe, it's already there?
In the block universe, as I step back and think about it mathematically, geometrically, it's already there. The entire universe is there, the beginning, the end, if there is an end. It's a little fuzzy in my mind because I don't know what's up there. I think I know what's at the beginning. Look, we do it all the time. You have a novel, you read it, the whole story is there. It's in the book, from beginning to end. It's all there. But as you read it through, you feel the flow. But it's all there in front of you. Anyone who lives in the block universe feels the flow of time from past toward future. But I, as a physicist looking in from the outside, just see it as a unified entity.
Space and time, taken together, are absolute. But taken separately, space and time are relative. Kip says personal. Space and time are personal. We each have our own personal space and time based on our relative movement, relative to each other. I didn't promise this would be easy. I hear that what happens in particle physics at extremely small distances dooms space-time. So I head to Harvard to see Nima Arkani-Hamed, an innovative string theorist who integrates particle physics with the origin and structure of the universe. Nima has radical ideas about the nature of time. Nima, just when I thought I was understanding space-time, you come along and tell me that space-time is doomed. Why?
Well, space-time is doomed as a really elementary consequence of the existence of both quantum mechanics and gravity. And we say space-time is doomed because If you think space-time is something real, then you should be able to meaningfully talk about separations of space and separations in time of any arbitrary amount that you like. So we can talk about separations in time of seconds, separation in space of meters, but you should also be able to talk about it at arbitrarily short times and arbitrarily short distances. And we know that that's impossible because of gravity, because if we try to probe very, very tiny distances by the uncertainty principle, we have to use a lot of energy. And when we get to tiny enough distances, we have to use so much energy that we collapse a little region of space-time we're trying to look at into a black hole. And that makes it impossible to probe what's going on in that region.
Because so much energy by E equals mc squared, Einstein's famous equation, means that there's so much mass, the mass and energy curve space-time, and it all collapses.
Exactly, and they make it impossible to see the region you were trying to look at. So this is a very simple thought experiment that that takes together the two basic ingredients, quantum mechanics, gravity. You put together quantum mechanics and gravity, and you see that it's simply impossible to make sense of space and time separations that are smaller than a very tiny amount. But the distances and times that we're talking about are the Planck length, the Planck time, Planck length 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, the Planck time 10 to the minus 43 seconds. So we know that space and time, just from this simple argument, can't really make sense because we can't talk about arbitrary separations in space.
So let me understand what that would mean. That would mean that you cannot have space and neither space nor time being continuous down to these very, very, very small lengths or moments, and that at those moments there's some sort of a separation. And does that mean that space and time become quantized and just like electromagnetic radiation has a photon and that everything is in little discrete bits?
That is the most sort of naive idea for what might be happening.
Thank you.
Okay. That's, and in fact, there are approaches to quantum gravity which take that naive idea very seriously.
Okay, good. I'm glad to see somebody takes that seriously.
But I suspect, and many other people suspect, that that's too naive. It's very hard to lay down some kind of discrete lattice-like structure on space-time. Okay, in a way that's compatible with the laws of relativity. So it's not that. It isn't that there are some atoms of space and time. That's the most naive sort of idea. But there's something much more subtle and interesting going on. In fact, there's an amazing idea known as holography. It begins to give us an idea for a more radical picture for how this discreteness happens. But holography is the idea that in fact there's a drastically smaller number of bits of information that you need to specify that isn't restricted to the volume of the space, but it's instead restricted to the boundary of the space.
The surface.
The surface. So that the number of bits that you need to specify is the area of the surface in Planck units. Okay. Now,
that sounds counterintuitive.
It's completely counterintuitive, and that's the reason for the word hologram, is that it's roughly the way in which three-dimensional information is encoded in a two-dimensional hologram. And similarly, what's going on inside a volume of space is encoded in very subtle ways in terms of what's going on at the boundary.
So what would follow from this concept of emergent space and emergent time, emergent space-time?
Without understanding emergent space-time, we don't know how to address any of the really fundamental questions that ultimately, putting quantum mechanics and gravity, we're supposed to address. What happens at the center of a black hole, what the origin of the universe means. Emergent time is the one, is a clear intellectual bottleneck.
Space and time are emergent, meaning that they are not fundamentally existent, but form out of something deeper. Something deeper than space and time? What could that be? How far can this go? I'm in San Francisco, and happily, so is Lee Smolin, an innovative and controversial physicist working at the Perimeter Institute in Canada. Lee suggests that reimagining time is key for explaining everything.
The big question is space an arena in which things happen, in which things come on and off? Or is there no arena? Is space just a network of relationships? A way to ask the question is, if the whole universe were moved entirely 10 meters to the left, would it matter? Does it even mean something to say that? Because no relationships would change. And Newton said yes, it is different. And Leibniz said, no, it's even wrong to ask the question because there's no discernible difference between the universe here and the universe 10 meters to the left. And this very question of whether space is a framework, an absolute background, or whether space is an aspect of reality that grows out of a network of relationships, of causality, of change, is the fundamental question. This is the modern way of understanding Einstein's theory of general relativity. And so if you think about the structure, an event happens and light goes out of it. We have these pictures of light cones going out. And if you can travel from that...
As light goes out over time at the speed of light, it covers in greater and greater distance.
Greater and greater distance. So you imagine a sphere going out. Now, if a later event happens within that sphere, information could have reached there from the first event going at slower than the speed of light. And so there could be a causal relation. There will be a causal relation between the first event and the second. If another event is so far away that light could not have gotten there, then there's no causal relation. And the interesting thing is, if you write down a list of all the causal relations between all the events in the universe, you describe the geometry of space-time almost completely.
Oh. So whereas the common perception is that we have space, and in the space there are relationships like my chair and your chair, or there are causes that I push your chair and you move a little bit, that is an artificial distinction, that maybe it's the events themselves that create the concept of space?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, that's...
And that's not just a metaphor, it's the best way of understanding both the principles and the mathematics of Einstein's theory of general relativity.
Now let's bring time into it, because Einstein...
But time is already in it, because causality is time.
So what you're saying is that time then is also emergent, because once you have the cause, time is a natural product of that, as opposed to time being something that we flow through.
Yes, if you take that point of view, then causality is the fundamental aspect of time, and our experience of the flow of time is a product of that.
A derivative?
A derivative of that.
Okay.
For me, this is one of the profound issues. The issue is time really fundamental, so that it's the one thing that's not emergent? Or is time somehow emergent or a consequence of other things? And of course, we don't know the answer, but different approaches to the fundamental questions about cosmology, about quantum gravity, line up on different sides of those questions. And this is something I've been thinking about myself a great deal, and I've been finding personally, I'm thinking more and more in the direction that time is fundamental, is not emergent.
Differentiated from space?
Yes.
So you are teasing apart space and time?
Because in quantum gravity...
Sounds quite radical.
Sure it is, but it's also maybe the most conservative solution to a set of conundrums that we face when we try to bring together quantum theory and gravity, because the other alternative is that time goes away completely. And in the view that time goes away completely and time is, quote, emergent, then the world is nothing but a vast collection of moments with not necessarily any relation amongst them. The relations of time, of causality dissolve, and there's just disconnected moments. And this does represent a proper interpretation of certain mathematical approaches to quantum gravity. Okay. But these approaches, they succeed to a certain extent, and then they fail. There comes a moment when you say, is that over here really a technical problem, or do we just have a conceptual misunderstanding?
And that's what you think about time?
That's what I think about time.
Everyone feels time. No one knows time. The hidden metronome of happenings that seem to beat out the intervals of cosmos and life belie the cryptic complexity of time. What's real about time? Einstein showed that time and space are not absolute. Separately, each is relative, personal. Collectively, they form a fundamental unity. Time energizes the core of reality, marks events, constructs the cosmos. Some say that time is not real. It's an illusion of events. Others that time, not space, is most fundamental. Is time continuous or discrete, or emergent in some strange new way? As British biologist J.B.S. Haldane said, the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose. It's time to get closer to truth.
For complete interviews and for further information, please visit closertotruth.com.